We are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means.
Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. Tonight's featured show is Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. Welcome to the Republic News Network for our live national broadcast. You may call me Kelby, and tonight I'm going to be acting as your moderator. The RNN, which stands for the Republic News Network, has been doing this radio show since 2010, and it's always been a friendly introduction for the people of the United States Corporation. Here we go. It's true. The United States is a federal corporation, and their exclusive jurisdiction is in the District of Columbia. The Republic government was simply a bunch of U.S. citizens that in law don't have access to the Bill of Rights, and they realized they wanted to be Americans as our founders and our law provided each and every one of us. See, we've been hard at work since 2008, and since 2010, we have successfully re-inhabited the original government vacated under Lincoln in 1861. I know, it's hard to understand. Don't worry. We are law-abiding, peaceful Americans and very pro-government, and we love our country. You can consider the Republic members are tired of the corruption that we see every day. See, we found in the law that there is two forms of government here on the land, and we did something about it. We are people. Mothers, fathers, sons, daughters. We have families. Just like you, we simply found some truths, and now we're sharing these important truths with the rest of the world. So get ready to hear things that sound amazing, and get ready to understand that you, too, are about to be a part of history. We welcome each one of you to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel and your Republic, if you so choose. But before we go into our broadcast tonight, please bow your head in prayer.
Father God, we want to thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to share truth with the world. Lord, protect the people that are sharing this truth. Protect their families. Lord, and help it instill upon the hearts of the alphabet soup and the federal government to help them understand what is really happening, because there's a lot of good people that are in government. So there's just a few bad. So, Lord, we ask that you guide the leaders on this call and that you keep their families safe. And it's in your son's name we pray. Amen. Mr. Happel, I yield the floor.
Thank you, Kelby. We're really looking forward to tonight's Connecting the Dots show, because we have a really remarkable couple of guests on this show to talk about a subject that has been very definitely underreported, if not totally unreported, by the mainstream media. And that is the trial of the Malheur Occupiers, an inside look at the events surrounding the occupation. And tonight our guests are John Lamb and Brand Thornton. And John and I had an opportunity to visit for the first time here a couple of weeks ago. And we had an opportunity to spend probably more time than you wanted to, John, this past weekend. But we attended an event in Phoenix, Arizona together, and John went on to Nevada to visit with some of the folks that are in the jail or the prison there in Las Vegas. So with that, John, I would like to ask you to give our listeners a brief background on yourself and why and how you decided to find out about Malheur occupation and observe the trial in person, and then Brand, I would ask you to do briefly the same thing.
Sure. Nope. Okay, I appreciate the opportunity. You know, Dan, I really, it was an honor for me to be over there in Arizona with you guys. I learned a whole lot, so that was my pleasure to be there and an honor. So don't take it for granted there that I did not appreciate that. That was a great honor. To get So how I got involved here is I was probably watching what happened there in Burns. I was not a part of the occupation or the protest there that happened, but I was watching it day and night as it was unfolding, and was in a learning process, I guess, trying to see what was happening. Why would a bunch of cowboys and good-hearted people go plumb out of state to at the rescue of a rancher over there? And why would someone that didn't even know someone else want to help somebody so bad? And I know that was kind of my bringing up, that you always helped your neighbor. Their house burnt down, you helped them build one back, or whatever the occasion was. And so I started following it really closely. Then early April, after the guys had been in jail for some time, I had been in contact with different people that I knew, and one was the Ryan family. Then they're from Montana, and a really good family, and their son was there at the refuge, and he had towards the end there, he was one of the last people that was arrested, and they had a warrant out for his arrest, and I had visited their home multiple times. And then after that I started attending the hearings there in Portland, and trying to go to every single one of them if I could, just to hear for myself what was going on, and if I could help any of these guys, I wanted to help them in any way I could to get them out and get them back with their families, because I felt that they were being held unjustly. I also helped one of the guys that was in jail. He had to have a job to get out of jail and a place to live. His name is Daryl Thorne. I provided him a job and a place to live for close to 7 months so that he could get out of jail and not be locked up anymore. And as it continued further, I kept getting more and more involved and ended up attending the trial that started on September 7th. And myself and several other guys, we stayed the complete time there. I was there in Portland pretty much for 48 days, and got to attend the court hearing or the court trials, the jury trial, the closing arguments. Got to attend almost every one of them. If I wasn't outside either marching around the jail or trying to bring some awareness outside, I was inside taking notes of what was happening. And yes.
All right, good. And Brand, were you in pretty much the same situation?
I actually go back some time ago. I live in southern Nevada, and I've been watching what's been going on in this country, and I was looking for opportunities to make a stand and make a statement. And I'm also related to the Bundys. But I got up there in April of 2014 and was part of that group that jumped the BLM coming out of those hills. And that's how I originally got started, and I stayed there through that entire thing during the standoff. I actually acted as a mediator between one of the militia groups and the sheriff's department there. But that's how I originally got started. And I realized that it wasn't over. They were going to come back. And I found out through certain circles that was exactly true. So when Ammon on social media put out the call for what was happening up there in Burns, Oregon with the Hammonds, I just jammed on up there, and I was at the protest. And then I ended up in the meeting where Ammon presented his idea, and I was one of the original group that went in and occupied the refuge. And as a matter of fact, I was the only one that was not arrested and has not been arrested even to this day. And that's how I originally got into it. And then I met up with John there in Portland for the trials, and I was a witness a couple of times for the defense. And that's pretty much my story.
Okay, well, good. That gives us a good background on both of your rationale and reasoning for being there. But what I'd like to do, we're going to have roughly 50 minutes to get through this, so I want to get as much of the detail out as we possibly can. So I guess I will let you guys decide who wants to answer these questions first, but you can follow up on one another's answer. Let's just we'll try to make sure we can get through all this and so that we can get it before the listeners. Would you tell our listeners about the various actors, and by actors I mean the people involved in the courtroom, the judge, the jury, the defense attorneys, the prosecutors, and the various law enforcement agencies that were there? Just tell us kind of who they were, and then we will get into a little bit more of the detail.
John, I think you should go ahead on that, first of all.
Okay. Well, in the courtroom, if as we started the jury trial, I guess we'll mainly talk about that the mostly. There were 7 defendants. Each one of those defendants had either a standby counsel or a lawyer that was hired by them. So we had 7 lawyers and plus 3 other standby counsel that was hired by the defense team there too. So we had a total of 10 lawyers and 7 defendants. Then we had 3 prosecuting attorneys. Behind the prosecuting attorney, there sat a FBI agent that what I understand was he's from Nevada, and he was taking notes so that when the trial continued in Nevada for the guys here coming up in February 7th, that he could take notes to transfer down there for their trial. There was ended up only being 19 jurors out of 20 that they originally selected, because one of the 20 got dropped for some reasoning that I'm not for sure about, but they got dismissed. So there was only 19 of them that sat there. 12 that was main jurors, and the rest were alternative jurors in case they ended up needing them, in which we ended up finding out we did need one of those alternative jurors at almost the last part of the trial there. And then there was Judge Anna Brown that sat on the seat there to that handled the case.
Okay, good. What were the charges that were brought up against the occupiers and against the defendants on this?
There were mainly 5 charges, and the main charge was conspiracy to impede federal officers. The number 2 charge was committing that crime per se with a gun or a weapon. And then the other charges were theft-type charges, such as stealing equipment. One of the guys had drove a truck that belonged on the refuge, and he used it to just drive to town, pick up some groceries, and drive it back to the refuge. There was also a couple others that were charged with stealing cameras that the FBI had set up out there after the refuge was occupied or the protesters were there. The FBI went out and set up some cameras along the highway to monitor the coming and going of these people. And those cameras were removed and offered back to the FBI if they wanted to come and get them, or they could take them to them. So, but they were charged with the theft of those. Those, as we found out, all them charges ended up getting dropped, or because the jury found them not guilty.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Will you tell our listeners about the disclosure, I guess, that government operatives were sent into the compound and to discuss, what they brought with them, including supplies and training that they were trying to bring into the Malheur complex, and why that was happening?
That's a very interesting point there, because the trial was almost over with. I'm going to guess we was in day 30 or 35, somewhere high up, and the government had been bringing in all this evidence showing that these people brought in guns and ammunition. There was, if I don't remember right, I might have to ask Brandon, maybe 50, 60,000 rounds of ammunition, 35 plus weapons and guns. And the defense team worked tirelessly and well to uncover some of this stuff and see where some of this stuff came from. And it got uncovered that there were 15 total informants involved there in Burns, Oregon. And
Let me say something about those firearms. Of course, I was there for close to a month. And, I got to see pretty much all the firearms that were out there. Well, the firearms that the government presented were, for the most part, like I think 25 or so of them, were all Woodstock SKS. There was not one Woodstock SKS out there while I was there. So those firearms were planted by the government. And I think it was the two individuals that came in claiming to be Navy SEALs towards the end there. And I will add this also. There was two young gentlemen that came in that I kind of accidentally jumped on the third day that were in one of the main buildings there. And they had broken into the safe. And they supposedly found the money there, but I'm quite sure they didn't find that money there. They put something like $10,000 in that maroon envelope, and they passed it on to another gentleman that gave it to Ammon Bundy, and I was right there when it was given to him. Well, those two young men never showed up again. I never saw them again. I will tell you now, they very much looked like FBI agents. And they're driving the typical FBI vehicle, and they were truck, and they also had typical FBI firearms. So I wanted to add that also to show just the lengths that this government had gone to incriminate everybody out there.
It's like some of the weapons were registered to a police agency in Idaho that were left behind. Then there was an informant, his name is John Kilman, and he also brought weapons in here and provided training for everyone towards the end. This training did not start, and Brand could confirm this, that this training was not an ongoing thing that happened ever until this John Kilman, or Fabio Menaggio, I think if I'm pronouncing his actual name, he came in there as a government informant, and he started trying to entice them to be trained in case something happened. And he also brought weapons.
He was acting as a provocateur, and he was the $10,000 man. You had McConnell's a $25,000 man. John Kilman was the $10,000 man. He is an Interpol agent, okay? He is a UN man. I'll tell you that right now just from the information I had. And he said he was only there for 3 days. He was there for at least 5 days. That was a big lie. And he did 3 of those trainings. He brought up in court. There's one. No, he did 3 of those trainings because my son was there, and he gave me details about those 3 trainings and the way he acted towards everybody there, trying to incite them. So this was a bad man. He followed us into Utah looking for us, and we've actually made him in Utah and confronted him, and he jammed out of there.
Okay. Now, John, I know that you had talked about that during the trial there was disclosure by the defense, and it's part of the court record now, that these weapons, many of them were brought in by let's say the provocateurs or the government operatives. Can you give us shed a little bit of additional light on that? Because I want to refer back to the actual court proceedings so that we know for sure that we can back up with what we're saying here.
Yes. So, and Brand was there also, so he can confirm this with me. It's on public record under testimony and oath with the jurors present, that out of these 35 weapons total that the government has, that there was only 3 of them, a total of 3 of them that were actually registered to any of the defendants that were charged there.
Yes.
So the defendants that were facing trial, only 3 of these weapons actually belong to those defendants. The rest of them belong to unknown sources or informants.
Okay, good. That's what I'm looking for. Now, tell me, during this trial, what important defense testimony was ruled as inadmissible by Judge Brown? And was the Constitution included in that list of exclusions?
It definitely was. The Constitution, they tried to bring it up multiple times. She ordered that it could not be brought up in front of the jurors at all. They couldn't read from it. The only way they even got the Constitution in at all in any part of it is Ryan Bundy on occasion. I think Ammon Bundy on one occasion on the stand was able to quote it by memory, different parts of the Constitution, but that was the only way it was actually admissible in court. Other than that, it was excluded and told that they couldn't, the jurors were not allowed to possess or own a Constitution while they sat as a juror on the stand, and it was not allowed to be used in court.
She would almost come out of her seat anytime, for example, Ryan would start to pull the pocket Constitution out of his shirt pocket, and she would point and say, "Don't you dare read that in my court."
Well, it sounds like she had good reason to feel that way. John, would you tell us any of the other things? Because I know you had mentioned to me there are quite a few things that Judge Brown ruled as inadmissible by the defense. So could you kind of give us an outline of other things besides the Constitution?
Well, I know that the defense team had about 70 plus witnesses they wanted to call, and she ruled that these witnesses were copying other witnesses. She hadn't heard, she didn't know what they were going to say, but she determined that they had too many witnesses and that they had to size their witnesses down, the defense team. And so the prosecution brought in 45 witnesses. And each one of these witnesses of these 45 pretty much said the same thing. Every one of them were some form of federal officer. There was only 2 witnesses out of the 45 that were not actual federal employees. They were either BLM officers, federal fish and wildlife officers, FBI agents, some type of government-paid employee or informant. And when it got down to it, we only had 26 witnesses total, and we had to struggle, the defense team did, to bring those 26 witnesses in.
Because they were objecting to hearing those witnesses?
Yes. They called it accumulative, that they said, the prosecution and the judge said that they did not want to hear any witnesses that might agree with a second witness, that the jurors don't need to be concerned about a witness says, yes, I know Ammon Bundy did not have a gun. One witness is good enough, the judge would say. We don't need 3 witnesses to testify that he didn't have a gun. We already know if he had one or not by the first witness.
But the prosecuting witness or prosecutorial witnesses were allowed to repeat pretty much lockstep, reinforce one another's testimony. Is that my understanding? Is that
right?
That
is correct. They just repeated the same thing over and over again. And when they were actually asked any actual important information, like about Lavoy Finicum's shooting, that was prohibited from the courtroom. Nothing of Lavoy Finicum shooting, they said it was not had anything to do with this case, and it could not be mentioned. But when they would ask these FBI agents a question, they couldn't recall, or they had no knowledge of that, such as they would say, do you know how many informants were at the refuge? And that FBI agent would say he didn't know, he didn't have any information on that, he just knew what his job was, and that would be it. These FBI agents only had enough information to provide what the prosecution wanted to ask them. Other than that, their mind was slipping when there was actually real evidence to be brought out.
Sure. Tell us about those government operatives, the informants that were at the refuge, and also your knowledge about how they were being compensated for being operatives for the federal government.
Well, they were definitely all paid cash, every single one of them. And the way we understand it, by at least two of the informants that testified, this cash was tax-free. That John Kilman, he testified on the stand, and he said that he was not paid for as a salary. It was just compensation for his time and expenses, is how he worded that $10,000 that he got. And to make that more clear, he got $10,000 plus all expenses. So anything that he spent from gas money to whatever from fixing his car, he got paid on top of that $10,000. Terry Linnell, she was the woman informant that testified on the stand. She's from California, and she was paid $3,000 plus expenses. But she worked as a cook in the refuge, so she came there not knowing anyone, and was welcomed in with open arms, just like everybody was. They wasn't trying to keep anybody out of the refuge. They was there to bring awareness to what was going on there in Harney County and the corruption that was going on. So they wasn't trying to keep people out. If an FBI agent walked up, they would let them in. That was brought out publicly in court on record that this is how these things went, you know. So this Terry Linnell was paid $3,000 cash plus all expenses. And all of her job is just to give out information that she overheard and just cook food and feed the people.
Okay. Now, there were others as well. What about Mark McConnell? Can you give us a little information about him? Because I know he was a paid informant as well.
He's the one that he got brought out in court as a paid informant. He never was able to be brought in to testify, but the government themselves confirmed under oath and record that he was one of the main paid informants. He was the $25,000 informant, and that they mainly agreed to that so the defense team would quit trying to dig for informants. But
let me make a statement about Mark McConnell also. Mark McConnell, the few days he was out there, he acted as a bodyguard to Ammon and Ryan Bundy and even others. And I slept right next to him one night, and he was armed. And I asked him directly. I said, "So you're going to be acting as a bodyguard tonight?" And he said yes, which I find very interesting because, in other words, here's a government informant that is prepared, with violence to defend certain peoples. So that is such a tremendous conflict of interest. The other thing that I noticed about him, I kind of surprised him. I came out of the bathroom when he was in his boxer shorts there. This guy's got tattoos all over his body, and they're not nice tattoos. They're something that I would equate with wickedness and evil, devil worship type stuff.
Okay. Well, with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about, first of all, I think our listeners need to understand this whole occupancy was a result of the trial and then I suppose I would call it a second trial, even though it really wasn't. It was double, double jeopardy. Against the Hammonds, and that's the reason this protest even started, was because the Hammonds were sent back to federal prison. Dwight and Steve, the father and the son, were sent back to federal prison, even though they had served about a year under the original verdict handed down by a judge, and they were in essence retried and resentenced to 5 years minimum because of the what's the term for it? The terrorism legislation, yeah, that sort of thing. So, just so our listeners know, that's what was what started this whole occupation of the Malheur Wildlife area. So, with that, let's talk again a little bit. Get your information on juror number 4, because I know that the jury actually asked for his expulsion, and kind of give a little background on that.
Well, I think we're missing something here. If you don't mind, I'd like to go back to the Hammonds real quick.
You bet.
The Hammonds were tried under domestic terrorism arson. And while I was there in the refuge, there were 2 gentlemen that came in and had been eyewitnesses to who actually started that fire around the Hammond Ranch. These were 2 outfitters. They were out there looking for, deer, antelope for their clients coming up. And they sat within 10 feet of me, and we have video of them swearing under oath that they saw the BLM with drip torches start those fires around the Hammond Ranch. It was not a lightning strike. They were burning the Hammonds out to get rid of them. And the way they lit those fires, it sounded to me that if the Hammonds had not set those backfires, they would have all probably been killed and their ranch totally destroyed. And they set those backfires to protect their lives, to protect their homes, their livestock. And when they set those backfires, 130 acres of quote-unquote public land got burned. Well, they held the grazing rights to that 130 acres. So in other words, they burned their own grass. And They got charged for domestic terrorism for protecting their lives. One other thing that this lady, Anna J. Brown, would come out of her seat every time she heard adverse possession. And just briefly, if anybody has looked at the emergency motion to dismiss, back in the 30s and the 40s, the government had purchased that land from a cattle company with the purpose of the CC projects coming out of the Depression. They never did have jurisdiction over that land. It was always retained by the state. And then when they got done with it, they, by mandate, said that land was to be liquidated and disposed of as soon as possible and invite adverse possession, which basically is squatter's right. Now, Ammon was privy of that. And he actually taught that while we were there. He taught it to numerous ranchers and even some of the militia type that were there. And there's video clips of it. And that is legal. It is lawful. Congress mandated it. And she would come out of her seat anytime it would even get close to mentioning adverse possession. I just wanted to bring us up to speed on those 2 things.
That's good, Brad, because that really gives us a lot of extra background on this. So anyway, we'll get back to this. John, would you tell us about juror number 4 and how that whole thing transpired?
Yes, the defense team uncovered juror number 4 right away, when they were selecting the jurors. But the prosecution was adamant about keeping this juror. This juror was a BLM agent, had worked for the BLM for over 20 years, and has also worked as a prison guard in the prison system. And so the defense team wanted that juror off for biased reasons they felt that could come up in the case. And the judge decided to go ahead and keep juror number 4 and not dismiss that juror like they did so many other jurors for other reasons that were smaller than this. And so towards the end of the trial, we still had our eye on that juror, was hoping for the best, that the juror wouldn't be biased and would listen to the evidence. But towards the end, after the jurors went into deliberation, several jurors decided that this juror was biased and they was not going to get anywhere. It was going to be a locked decision, and it was going to be a mistrial is the way it was looking. But juror number 11 decided to write a note to the judge and demand that this juror be dismissed because of his biasness. It took us almost a whole day. They made the jurors stop their deliberation. The prosecution and the judge and the defense team argued about the decision about whether they wanted to get rid of this juror or not. The prosecution wanted to keep the juror. The judge wanted to keep that juror. But finally the judge said, Mumford told the judge, it said he was going to ask for a dismissal because the judge was the way she was ruling. So the judge excused herself and said, I'm going to go back to my chambers. I want you guys to work this out. And when I come back, have me a decision. The prosecution finally decided to give in and go ahead and dismiss that juror and bring in an alternative juror. Within just a few hours of deliberation, when they went back, we had a not guilty verdict.
Okay, good. That's an important part of this trial, is understanding that from the very beginning there was a ringer on the jury, and it was a ringer that was really insisted on by the prosecution. So let's get on to the killing of Lavoy Finicum, how and how that roadblock and so forth was orchestrated. Now, I know that neither one of you gentlemen were actually there, but I also know that you talked very directly to the people that were there, and have some information on that. And I'd like you to tell our listeners just exactly how that whole thing came down.
Well, I know Brand and I both have. Brand knows the people that were there even better than I do. He's known them a lot longer than I. I have met Ammon Bundy and Ryan Bundy and all these guys. I've met them only behind bars and in visitations in jail. But I do know the complete story. I have been to Burns, Oregon a few times. I actually went out to the memorial site there where Lavoy was murdered, and actually camped out there for about 5 days. And so I've gotten pretty close to the case, pretty close to what's going on, and have seen this stuff personally. And Brand can back me up if I'm wrong or right here on some of this, but on the day that, on the 26th of January, they were heading to a meeting over in John Day with the sheriff over there, Glenn Palmer. And it was a public meeting. Everybody knew about the meeting, and they was all on a kind of a schedule. The person who had taken charge there of their transportation was one of the informants, and he was trying to schedule people to get out of there. And what I'm hearing from multiple witnesses is that he was even getting kind of irate or aggravated a little bit because people were behind schedule, and he was trying to get them, and he said, we're late, we got to get going. And he was trying to send people out, I guess, about 15 minutes apart. So there wasn't like 30 or 40 vehicles heading all there at once. And they also made sure that almost everybody was unarmed but himself. So the vehicle that Ammon Bundy was riding in, this informant, Mark McConnell, was driving that vehicle. And there was only two other people in there, and that was Ammon Bundy and Brian Cavalier. They were both unarmed. And the other vehicle that was in front of him was Lavoy Finicum's vehicle, and there was 5 people in that vehicle. I understand that Ryan Payne was carrying a gun in that vehicle, but when they got stopped at the very initial first stop, there was a bullet that got shot there at that time. A gun went off and shot the side of the mirror of Lavoy's truck when their hands were all out the window, and that's on video, and we've got that video broke down showing that shot. And at that point is when Ryan Payne had a gun on him, supposedly. He took the gun off and laid it in the floorboard of the vehicle and stepped out of the vehicle and turned himself in and went straight to the ground and was arrested. And Lavoy and Ryan Bundy kept trying to talk to the people out there, asking who they were, who were they with, and telling them that they were going to go to the sheriff and that they did not feel comfortable staying there, obviously, with the situation, what was happening. They took off and didn't make it much further down the road and ended up into a roadblock, which most of us have probably seen the video on YouTube and different places of that. And that's where they ended up shooting Lavoy Finicum 3 times in the back and killing him.
Okay, and Lavoy was not armed. Am I correct in that?
Lavoy was not armed. He had a shoulder holster that he normally carried. He had a revolver that he normally carried. And just the same day, within an hour or two of him leaving, he gave a video, and he actually he did a live stream or a video of some things there at the refuge. When he did that video, he had that shoulder holster on in that video, and he also had his 6-shooter, his revolver on at that time. And neither one of those, that shoulder holster or that 6-shooter, was on his side when he was killed.
Right, and he was that left at the compound? That was my understanding.
That was definitely left at the compound, and other individuals there removed those. Okay. But they were definitely left at the compound, and the FBI does not have those in their possession, which they thought they were going to have, I'm sure. But after they shot him, they thought they could set him up that way. But they do not have them weapons.
I would like to say something about that. Also, that stop. There was several laws that were broken, state laws and federal laws. At the initial stop, the vehicles were not marked, and also the Oregon State Police, their uniforms were not marked. Now, you have people in this country that impersonate police officers, and you have the right to question them because you never know. Also, when they left there and they hit that snowbank, it was 30, by law, it was 30%, at least 30%, short of the stopping distance required to put a stop, which in this case is called a dead man stop. So people have a hard time wrapping their mind around how could the law enforcement break these laws. Well, Judge Darby there summed it all up. These were foreign agents working under InfraGard. Okay? Now, Ammon Bundy has a bullet in his shoulder. I've talked to his mother personally. She talked to him. They've taken x-rays of that bullet. It is a .308 caliber bullet. Oregon State Police were shooting 5.65s out of their rifles. That is an FBI round that is in his shoulder. Now, we all know those FBI agents are under investigation to this day. I don't believe they're going to do anything with them because of this InfraGard, which is the most insidious program where foreign corporations, United States corporations can solicit and subcontract all military and FBI and local police to work for them. That is why they could care less about breaking any of our laws. In fact, in the write-ups afterwards, where they interviewed these FBI agents, they knew they had to stop Lavoy and all those people before they got to Grant County, because Grant County has declared themselves a UN-free zone, whereas Harney County has not. They endorse it.
Okay.
These are important things to understand Why? Because people say, well, they would never break those laws, so it's got to be false. Well, there's still forensics of independent source that do an awesome job showing all the laws that were broken, and everybody should watch those. Okay, good. Well, Brand, I appreciate you including that. Now, it was my understanding that it was Ryan Bundy, not Ammon Bundy, that got a bullet in the shoulder, and I was hoping that, John, you could kind of explain how that happened and how they were trying to get him to have that bullet taken out, and he refused that. Do you have information on that?
I do, yes. Just before trial, about a month before the trial, coming up towards it, the U.S. Marshals had orders to remove that bullet from Ryan Bundy before the court date there, before the jury's trial started. So they multiple, without even in secret court hearings, without the public being present, without anything being made public, they would come and get Ryan Bundy on 2 different occasions, and not even tell him where he's going, just grab him, the U.S. Marshals would, from jail, and take him to court, where even no attorneys were present. It was just the judge, the prosecutors, and the U.S. Marshals, and where they declared that they were going to take that bullet from him. And then on the final, well, I guess it was two occasions, they attempted to take him to a doctor to have it removed. On one of these occasions, he refused to go and demanded that he get to talk to an attorney, get some help, tell somebody where he was going and what was going on, because he still did not know where he was going. They wouldn't tell him. They just came for him. And they ended up knocking him down. He fell down part of a stairs, busted his head. His knee, to this day, they beat him so bad that his knee, and I've seen this personally, his knee is swelled up so bad, and they will not give him medical care for it. It's about 3 times the size of his other knee. And he's never had knee problems before that incident where they beat him, and he hit his head hard, and he got kicked several times, and his knee got busted up. And it's got like water on it, and it's just humongous. It just looks painful just looking at it. And on the final time, they ended up taking him to a doctor. They're in Portland, Oregon somewhere. He doesn't know where it was at. He was taken to an undisclosed location, and they got him there to have the bullet removed. And the doctor asked him, do you consent to this operation? And because they could tell he was fighting it the whole time. And Ryan Bundy said, I do not consent. This is my body. I do not give up any of this. This is my evidence. And the doctor refused to take it out, refused to proceed with the procedure, the operation there. And that was the last time they actually tried.
Okay, good. That's well, it's good to know that this sort of thing was lurking around in the background, and I'm sure we're going to be creating a lot of questions by our listeners, but that's okay. Maybe we'll do a follow-up on this show where we can answer some of those questions, and we'll ask our listeners to send us a list if they have questions that they would like taken up and discussed. So would you fellows tell us about the verdict and the statements by the jury and just kind of the general mood in the courthouse as the not guilty verdicts were read, and then some of the attitudes by the jurors after that?
I'd like to say one other thing really quick that's always baffled me on these conspiracy charges. This law goes all the way back to the Civil War, where the secessionists actually did violate the enclave clause of the Constitution, where they actually did take over courthouses, docks, ports, arsenals, things of that nature, okay? There was crimes actually committed. How in the world do you have a conspiracy, and you can charge people with conspiracy, when there's no laws that have ever been committed? Now, having said that, I would like to answer or just go along with what you just said, and then I'll give the remainder of the time to John. It was awesome. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life. I live for that sort of thing, and just to see the joy and happiness and all the people that supported, like John Lamb was there for, like you said, 48 days, and there's all these other local gals like Kelly Stewart and Maureen Valdez and Deborah Sue Venatucci that donated and dedicated so much of their time because they knew that these defendants were innocent, and to see the happiness. And I mean, there was 26 major media outlets out front there. I had been talking to them. I've been walking back and forth and blowing the shofar. And I got in a conversation with a couple of them, and they were just so negative. They said, no, you're going to lose. You're all going to be found guilty. And when Maureen Valdez come out screaming her head off, not guilty, not guilty, and I turned and looked at them, and their jaws just hit the floor. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. So, yeah, it was, I just wish everybody could have been there and felt that spirit and that joy and that happiness. It's something that'll stay with me for the rest of my life. Don't you think so, John?
I think so too. That was one of the most emotional days I've had ever in my life, probably, because I was prepared for a verdict to come that day, possibly the way things were going, but I wasn't ready for the verdict that came because I thought we'd had a few more hours yet before it would come out. Then all of a sudden it was just a surprise. We didn't have it planned that way. We thought some of the ladies up in the courtroom, we were waiting on a verdict. It was pretty boring in the courtroom because we were just sitting there waiting for the jurors to end their deliberation and come back with a verdict. So I was out on the street with Brand and several other brothers from all over the country, from Alaska, I can't even remember all the states, but California, they was from all over, and they were down there waiting with us. What's that?
Some of those homeless people were with us.
We had a homeless guy down there with us that was on our side. He was a veteran, and he had lost one leg in the war, and he was sitting there in a wheelchair, and he was supporting us, waving a flag. We just had dozens of people that were down there waiting for this verdict to come, and it was a great day. And get back with that one question with the jurors you said. We had jurors that came and talked to us afterwards, told us that some part of their decisions were because of what we did. They seen how peaceful we were out there on the street. We were feeding people, feeding the homeless. We were protesting and marching peacefully around that jail constantly every day. We bowed our heads and dropped a knee in prayer every single day. And these jurors seen this from the sidelines, and they seen that we weren't what the government was presenting us to be. And they came over and talked to us personally after the whole case was over with and told us they appreciated who we were and they respected us.
Well, even some of the U.S. Marshals said they're going to miss us.
Yes, they did.
Well, maybe not for long the way that's been happening. I want to, and we are getting toward the end of the show here, guys. But I want to make sure that we mention, and that John, you talk about, tell the listeners about the incident with the defense attorney when he demanded the release of the jurors, or not jurors, the defendants, because they had been found not guilty. Can you kind of flesh that out a little bit?
Yes. So what happened right there, just moments before the verdict was read, the judge said, before I open this, I want to let everybody know there is going to be no emotions in this courtroom. I don't want anybody saying anything either way. And when she opened up the envelope and she pulled it out, her face just turned beet red. And this is multiple people, close to 100 people that got to witness this. And her face got beet red, and she said, Ammon Bundy all not guilty on count one. And that's when we knew you could tell she was really mad. And no one else had emotions except for her. that just really kind of threw us all in a loop. We weren't allowed to have emotions, but here she is beat red, and you can tell she's mad about this verdict, And then after these verdicts were read, everybody stood there like they were told. All the defendants were standing, and as soon as all that was done, the U.S. Marshals, the judge said you can take the men back into custody, and take them back to the jail. Well, you got to understand, David Fry, he's been in jail there for right at 9 months. He has no other charges anywhere pending, and he's been held, and now he's an innocent man, and he's been found guilty by jurors. They're taking him back into custody right along with everybody else that has trial everywhere else, and taking him back to jail for almost 6 more hours before they'll let him go. So an innocent man cannot walk out of that courtroom. But right when Mumford, Ammon Bundy's attorney, seen this, Mumford said, "No, these men are innocent. They've just been found not guilty. What charges do you have to hold them? Show me the papers." He couldn't get it out of his mouth. The judge said, "I don't have no jurisdiction, but the marshals say they're taking him." And he says, "No, show me the papers. Show me where you have the right to hold them." The marshals just came up and surrounded him. The newspapers say 12 marshals. We say there's 20 marshals. There was about 40-some marshals in that room, and we think about 20 marshals attacked him, drug a man just standing there trying to talk to the judge, drug him to the floor there in the courtroom in front of everybody, tased this man, and handcuffed him, and shackled him, and hauled him out along with all the other prisoners that had just been found not guilty.
Wow.
And it shocked us all. Even the judge said, "Stand down," told the U.S. Marshals, and they did not stand down. They just continued.
Wow.
And they arrested him for
amazing.
Disobeying a lawful order.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, we've got just a few minutes left. I want to ask you point blank, and I guess do it very quickly, but do you see a change in direction of the federal agencies as a result of this verdict, or do you see an increase in federal abuse?
I think there's going to be a change. I'm really hopeful for it, and I really think there is going to be a change.
I think if Trump had not been elected president, they would have doubled down, and I think it would eventually led to bloodshed. I am honorary member of 6 Militia. I keep across this nation. I keep in touch with them. The fact that Trump was elected president, I think it's going to end peacefully, and I think they will back off.
Well, that leads to my very last question, and that's how we'll close out this show. And I'll ask both of you individually to say if you could tell President Trump anything to investigate or to change in the procedures on the federal lands issues, what would you ask President Trump to do?
Well,
I think go ahead, Brandon.
Lazaro's got a tremendous amount of paperwork where you have this collusion between the federal judges and the BLM and the Forestry Department and the Fish and Wildlife Service, and where these federal judges are actually obtaining this land. For example, Harry Reid is the state senator. He's not a federal judge. But if you go back and you look at what happened to all that land in southern Nevada with those other, 51 ranchers that put out of business, well, he has the land. Okay? So there's this, that would be a good place to start. You know, the Hillary Clinton, the Clinton Foundation got $145 million from the Uranium One, which is to start mining on the Hammond Ranch and other places there in southeastern Oregon. And from what I understand from very credible sources, we killed that. We stopped that. But that's what needs to be looked at very, very closely, and charges need to be filed.
Okay, and John, what would you say?
I would tell him we need to get back to the basis of our Constitution, and we need to eliminate these regulations that are not even lawful laws, and ask him to look diligently in this, how people are being locked up wrongly for digging ponds on their property, for cattle grazing rights, things that have been our rights even afforded to us by the Constitution, and that regulations have eliminated our Constitution to a point where we don't even really have a Constitution in our courts any longer.
Exactly.
No, I think that's right. Well, gentlemen, I hope that we can have this discussion again, and that as some of these other trials that are coming up, that we can have you gentlemen on as guests on the radio show again, talk about what's happening with the Bundy trials down in Nevada, that we can find out exactly what's happening there, and you'll keep us posted on that. John, I know you will stay in contact with me on that, and Brand, I would look forward to that as well. And we will, again, have you gentlemen on Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and we will, with that, turn the show over to you, Kelby, and thank our guests for being on the show, and thank our listeners for joining us for another show in Connecting the Dots. Thank you.
Thank you for having
us.
You bet.
What an incredible show, and thank you, gentlemen, for coming on and having the opportunity to tell the truth about a situation that just simply fell off the map with the media and everybody else when the jury found him not guilty. So God bless you guys. That is going to conclude the show for this week. We'll see you next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific. God bless. Good night.